Okay, thank you all for being here. And let me thank all of my colleagues who are here with me this morning and for joining together for this enormously important piece of legislation. A bill which would prevent any funds from being used for a war with Iran without congressional approval. In the Senate, this bill has been co-sponsored by Senators Schumer, Leahy, Markey, Wyden, Gillibrand, Baldwin, Cantwell, Warren, Van Hollen, Harris, Blumenthal, and Merkley. Let me also say that I'm very pleased that the House leadership has committed to seeing that Congressman Connor's similar bill and Congresswoman Lee's repeal of the 2002 Iraq AUMF both come up for votes, and I look forward to working with them to get our legislation passed in the Senate. When I look back upon American history, I remember the two most significant foreign policy mistakes our country made in the modern era. And those were the war in Vietnam and the war in Iraq. And let us be clear, we were led into both of those wars by a series of lies. The result, the war in Vietnam cost us 59,000 American deaths, and many others came home wounded in body and spirit. In fact, a whole generation, my generation, was devastated by that war. The casualties in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia are almost incalculable, but they run into the millions of people. In 2002 and 2003, in terms of Iraq, we were told over and over again that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, that he was working with Al-Qaeda, and that we needed to invade Iraq unless we wanted to see another 9/11, or even worse, a nuclear attack. Those claims were lies. The war in Iraq led to the deaths of some 4,500 brave American troops and the wounding, physical and emotional, of tens of thousands of others. It led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and the displacement of over 5 million people, and the increased destabilization of an already unstable region. The war in Iraq cost us trillions of dollars, money that could have been spent to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, provide quality education for our kids, provide health care for the uninsured and underinsured. And after all of that, after all of the pain and suffering and death and the expenditure of trillions of dollars, the Iraqi parliament voted earlier this week to boot U.S. forces out of their country. And now we have a president who abandoned a nuclear agreement we signed with our allies, has turned to a policy of escalation, and appears to be walking us toward another disastrous war in the Middle East. And let's be clear, another war in the Middle East could cost, once again, countless lives and trillions more dollars, more conflict, more displacement, and more misery. As a United States Senator, I personally will do everything I can to prevent such a war. Just as we were led into Vietnam and Iraq by lies, the Trump administration is misleading us on Iran. They have justified the assassination of Qasem Soleimani by claiming that he was planning imminent attacks on hundreds of Americans in the region, and yet they produce no evidence that would justify this claim, not even in a classified setting. And that is why it is so important that we are all here today, members of the Senate, members of the House, because under our Constitution, and let us never forget this, it is the Congress that has the responsibility, not the President, for waging war. Our founding fathers understood that it was only too easy for a president to lead the country into a disastrous military conflict. That is why they gave the exclusive power over war and peace to the people's elected representatives. Last year, many of us worked together to pass a war powers resolution on Yemen, in which Congress, for the first time in history, used the powers laid out in the 1973 War Powers Act to constrain the president on matters of war. While President Trump vetoed that resolution, there is no question that it played a major role in signaling to the region, that the American people do not support the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen. And now is the time for us to once again come together and make certain that the president will not have one penny to spend on a war in Iran unless there is congressional authorization. Senator Leahy.
Thank you.